That reminds me of a quote from Talk to the Elephant. With intrinsic rewards, the challenge is that you as a designer don't get to decide what is intrinsic to someone else.
Hmm.
You don't get to make something internally rewarding. What you can do, though, is figure out what people in your audience value and help them connect the dots between
Hmm.
those values and the behaviors about which they are learning.
Right.
Could you share a story about finding maybe what your audience valued and kind of connecting those dots?
Yeah, well, I did a talk once on some of the behavior change design and things like that. And somebody came
Yeah,
up
yeah,
to
yeah.
me afterwards and they said, "How do you change people's values about the environment?" Like
Mm,
environmentally friendly behaviors. And I'm like, "Well, you don't. You show them how the values they already have actually connect to the behaviors that you're trying to see."
yeah.
So, for example, there's some research that looks at the question of how the words you use when you talk to people about environmental action can really make a big difference in terms of uptake and things like that, or at least acceptance of it, in the audience. If you were talking to, say, a politically conservative audience about environmentalism, if you talk about conserving our legacy or our heritage, or you like protecting, like there are a lot of words that you can use that tie into values that they already have,
Yeah.
right? And you
Yeah.
need to not do it in a disingenuous way.
Well,
This isn't
of
like,
course.
but so like one of the examples that I've used in the book, and I kind of will talk about a lot with this when you just sort of tying it to identity, is the relative success of the "Don't Mess with Texas" campaign. So if you've spent any time in Texas, you see these bumper stickers everywhere: "Don't mess with Texas." And the campaign office, this was actually an anti-littering campaign that was created, I believe, in
Huh.
the 80s. And it was ultimately fairly successful because it tied into values of the target audience, which was like 18 to 35-year-old men who were the most likely to litter, to be able
Sure.
to talk to them about, hey, you are proud Texan, you protect your state, you protect your environment, like you protect things. Part of that is making sure that nobody messes with, you know, the, the state. And part of
Yeah.
that is, it's not okay to throw litter on the ground, and, make this thing that you're proud of look trashy and whatever,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
And so that's a case where they were looking at, both sense of identity and sense of and values that already existed, and saying, here's
Yeah.
how the behavior of not littering aligns with an identity and values that you already have, as opposed to, hey, we want to make you care about, environmental whatever, like that's a changing what people intrinsically value is
Mhm.
not impossible, but boy, it's real hard. But aligning behaviors with those values, or showing how they make sense, is much is probably faster, and it's probably going to work better in the end. But you need to know a lot about your users in order to be able to do that. So if you're not having those conversations with them
Mhm.
and understanding what they care about and understanding what they value, and translating, the message into language that resonates with them, then then it's not gonna work real well. So
Yeah. Those ideas of kind of finding values, or I'll even say like kind of maybe common values.
mhm.
When designing learning experiences, what advice do you have for building rapport and consensus with the stakeholders and the collaborators?
Yeah, well, after graduate school, the first place I went and worked was Allen Interactions, which is
Okay.
Michael Allen's company, and he is one of the grandfathers of e-learning altogether. Right? He was worked on some of the original Plato stuff back at. He was working on like computer-based learning environments, in the 70s and things like
Wow.
that.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, early days. And he really very much believes in this prototyping approach, and I found that to
Mm,
be super helpful,
yeah.
because you can have these conversations and you all have a different image in your head of what this is ultimately going to look like. And so, can you do quick and dirty prototypes so that people can kind of test out ideas. Because, if you have an idea we should do one thing and your stakeholder has an idea that they should do another thing, if they're the ones writing the check, they pretty much get to decide. So as
Yep.
long as it's just your two opinions kind of duking it out, guess what? It's going to happen.
Uh-huh.
But if you can say, oh, that's a really interesting idea, let's prototype a version of it and we can all look at it and see what we think about it, or we can test it with our audience, right? Like it's the
Yeah.
other big piece of it. Because if you're bringing opinions, if somebody else is bringing opinions and you're bringing data, then it's not this, like that's not, oh, if it's an opinion versus opinion, then, the person, like I said, writing the check usually wins.
Yep.
But if it's opinion versus, oh, we have data that says this is what response we got from our audience,
Yeah.
then like that's not nearly as much of a who wins. That's just like, oh, here's what's going to be effective, and let's
Yeah.
work with that.
No, that's good. And yeah, you know, in the person writing the check, maybe in the classroom world, whoever's the person actually teaching, but just kind of finding those. So to provide some context, so if I'm supporting, let's say, a college teacher, I can build the things or give them the ideas,
Yeah,
but they're the ones in the classroom. So I like that idea of at least having like data informed, like here's what we
yeah.
found out, or here's what we've been going back and forth on with prototyping. I like those ideas.
Well, and I remember the first week I worked there, I was sitting in on some design meetings and things like that. And we went into one afternoon and we sat down and had a conversation with the client for an hour. And they said, okay, we'll have the prototype at like 3 o'clock and we can reconvene. And I was like, wait, what now? Because this was like, I don't know, 11:30 in the morning or something like that. And I'm just
Yeah.
like, we're going to have a prototype at 3 o'clock? What are you talking about? Because I had
Yeah.
never experienced
Yeah.
that before.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was it almost felt a little bit like a magic trick, but it was something that we used to do all the time, which is we would just sit down and I mean I've done it many, many times since then where we this was back in the early 2000s. And so we were building stuff in authorware, but we had really great authorware developers who would just mock stuff up in a
Yeah.
hurry. And again, it was stick figures and whatever, which
Hmm.
probably also fed into my stick figure thing later. But the what was the simplest way to just communicate what this interaction might look like and get some reactions to it? And the content was placeholder and the graphics were not pretty. And
Yeah.
but like rough, really rough prototypes can be put together very quickly. And you can, and I've had the experience of doing that and having the client say, oh, no, no, that's not right at all. We can't do that, which is fine because you
Yeah.
spent 2 hours on it. And,
Hmm.
okay, well, let's fix it and figure out what we need to do next. And nobody's angry or nobody's,
Yeah.
wasted weeks of
Hmm.
work on something. And that's, and more often than not, we had stuff that we would go forward with, but sometimes they'd be like, oh no, that's wrong. That's completely wrong. I was like, oh, okay, well, glad we figured that out now and not,
Yeah, exactly.
3 weeks from now. So I'm a fan. I'm a fan of the quick and dirty prototype. I do them a lot with PowerPoint and like you can do a lot with like linking between slides and PowerPoint to kind of, do smoke and mirrors interactivity for e-learning stuff, or you can mock up a virtual classroom activity, or you can do a bunch of things in a hurry and it's kind of, and then you can get immediate feedback on it. And that's
Yeah.
pretty great.
Yeah, and with those time frames you described, I mean, for anyone who's creating anything, there's a whole dynamic of like, well, we have all these options available and what when pondering through, but it's like, well, actually, yeah, we need like a first draft in a couple hours. Like, okay, well, here's an idea. Let's at least start with this and we'll have this back and forth and see what
Yeah.
happens. I really like
Mm-hmm.
that. Join us for part 5. Plants vs. Zombies is an amazing masterclass in design.